Every year, nearly 8 million pilgrims revolve around a marble pedestal in the middle of Florence, where they take in the sight of one of the most striking sculptures ever carved by human hands, Michelangelo's David. And beyond the breathtaking scale of the prophetic shepherd standing over 17 feet above the plinth, the figure ripples with political symbolism. As an example, David's gaze, piercing, unwavering, and full of confidence, was turned by Florence to face the rival city-states, which routinely threatened the civil liberties of the city. But beneath David's eyes, off to one side, lies the most surprising part of Michelangelo's carved would-be king. David's right hand, which is proportionally far too large for the sculpture. Some have suggested that the disproportionality is a consequence of an initial proposal to display David on a cathedral roofline, where the deliberate dimensional accentuation was designed for those who were looking up from below. But others see the expanded hand as a reference to David's medieval Latin nickname, Manu Fortis, meaning strong of hand. And it is the human hand which has for centuries across almost every culture served as a symbol of power. In Boston's Museum of Fine Arts lies a nearly 4,000-year-old Hittite silver drinking cup in the shape of a clenched fist. And for the last 2 centuries, revolutions the world over have been represented by a raised fist. The very term for weaponry is tied etymologically to our upper limbs when we speak of arms or armor or an armory, and anything that we can operate autonomously we call manual, once again tied to the Latin manus, meaning hand, along with other words like maneuver, manuscript, manners, maintenance, and of course manicure. And when kings and queens offer their palms in what seems like a rather weak royal wave, they are doing more than producing a merely graceful, if sedate, form of the common greeting. They are blessing the crowd with the power that they hold symbolically in their hands, as captured by the artist Hans Holbein in his 1538 masterpiece of Edward VI as a child, on display today in the National Gallery in D.C. And putting aside the theological quandaries about assigning God anthropomorphic qualities, if we think about the terminology that surrounds our emancipation from Egypt, it is all about a strong hand and an outstretched arm, which leads us to the most surprising turn in a verse toward the end of our parsha, when our leader and liberator and teacher and lawgiver's arm gives in. Having crossed the Sea of Reeds, our ancestors meet a tribe of fiends seeking their demise by targeting the weak. And as the people battle Amalek, Moshe stands atop a peak and inspires his army to persevere. V'haya ka'asher yarim Moshe et yado, when Moshe lifted up his hand, Gava Yisrael, Israel succeeded. But the strategy left a gap in their defenses, because ka'asher yaniach yado, when his hand rested, Gavar Amalek, Amalek rallied, which is why panic and terror strike when we read the next 3 words of the next verse, Videi Moshe Kvedim, Moshe's hands grew heavy. With Moshe's hands failing, the people face a very real possibility of defeat. So 2 assistants rush onto the scene and lift Moshe's hands for all to see. Aaron v'Chur tamchu b'yadav. Aaron and Chur grabbed his hands, mezeh echad, one on this side and one on the other. V'hi yadav emunah ad bo hashamesh, and his hands, behold, were steady until sunset. And this is my question: why do Moshe's hands grow heavy? It is true that he was over 80, and for some exegetes that is all we need to know to appreciate his frailty in this scene. But for others, Moshe, no matter his age, epitomizes muscle. So how could we allow ourselves to imagine him in this moment of profound need as weak? In the words of one commentator, Beshalach romech biado, are you telling me that this man that will one day, 40 years from now, will take a spear into his hand, kafetz lamala, leap into the air, laharoget og, to slay the giant og. Atayadav kfeidim legbehem, now his hands are too heavy to lift. For this commentator and many others, we are being asked to imagine that the warrior who will take down a proverbial mountain could not now hold up his own hands. What on earth is going on? And there are two answers to this question that address the tension and offer a lesson to us all. The first possibility, agreeing that Moshe, despite his age, has enough muscle to keep his hands on display for the people, sees his weakness as induced not by physical fatigue, but by moral failure. And on this account, Rashi is the harshest critic, seeing heaven as impugning Moshe for uncharacteristic apathy. For him, Moshe's surprising fatigue was a consequence of his torpidity, his apathy, his lethargy in the face of a national emergency. Remember, an enemy had amassed on the bank of the Sea of Reeds, awaiting the exit of a newly freed people, and yet Moshe's response in the moment seems oddly tepid. Vayomar Moshe Yehoshua, Moses said to Joshua, Bachal lanu anashim, choose for us soldiers, v'tzei lachem ba'amalek machar, and go out against Amalek tomorrow. And in this verse, Rashi alerts us to not one but two signals of Moshe's half-heartedness. Nit atzel b'mitzvah, he deferred the reaction, umana acher tachtav, and he delegated a surrogate in his stead. We could and should imagine, for Rashi, that Moshe, on seeing the threat, would rally the people, marshal an army, and launch an assault against Amalek with him at the helm. But he asks Yehoshua to lead the troops, and he asks him to do it tomorrow. And for this almost inexplicable lapse of leadership on the part of Moshe, Rashi sees the strength draining from his hands, having been drained of moral authority. His bodily stamina fades away as well. But there is a second reading of this moment which fundamentally recasts the scene and reverses the meaning of these words, turning an ostensible censure into an arresting accolade. For this sage, it is not Moshe who felt the weight of his hands, but God, who in reaction to Moshe's raised arms caves to the pressure of his prayers. For this sage, we imagine God saying, Kvedud heim Allah yadav shel Moshe, Moses' hands are too heavy for me. Heim kablu et ha-Torah, heim kablu et luchot habrit, heim kablu aseret ha-dibrot. These are the hands that will receive the law, receive the tablets, receive the 10 Commandments. Heim hevu el paro aser makot, hinkaru et hayam v'halichu et Yisrael. These are the hands that brought 10 plagues upon Pharaoh, that split the sea and now lead the people. For this sage, the weight of Moshe's muscle does not press on his frame, despite his age, but compels heaven to change. The sage does not censure Moshe for his delegation or delay. War requires patience and expertise and skill, and armies that are selected and prepped by the young. Moshe in this moment sees the opportunity that he can seize, and it is not at the front of the battle between Israel and its terrestrial enemies, but on the threshold between humanity and divinity, where he can exert unparalleled pressure on omnipotence. In this moment of crisis, Moshe envisions a division of labor where he hands the reins of war to his deputy, but lifts his hands as a source of national indemnity to harness prayer, to protect the people and turn the tide of combat in their favor. We tend not to speak too often about the power of prayer, and there are no guarantees in the context of prayer. But our tradition teaches that prayer has a power beyond our comprehension. We as a people are committed to a proactive theology where we fight our own battles and conceive of ourselves as shackled by responsibility for our own destiny. But as we face our obligations, prayer has a central place in our armory. So as we face the week, let us all pray for aid in every way that we can imagine. Let us pray for protection and support, for wisdom and for warmth, for patience, and of course, for peace. Michelangelo may have carved King David as a mano fortis, strong-handed, for his role in defeating Goliath, but we all know, especially on Shabbat Shirah, that David's power lay not only in his sling, but in the words that we all sing every time that we recite a psalm. So let us all arm ourselves, lift our hands to the heavens, and pray together for a world of blessing. I wish you a Shavua Tov.